Hump Day.
We welcome now Senator Daniel Sparks, represents District 5. That includes Itawamba, Prentiss, and Tishomingo counties. Serves as the chair of the Economic and Workforce Development Committee, vice chair, Judiciary B Committee. Always good to see you, Senator. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Gerard. Good to be here.
So there's a labor force study group that you're part of, or are you chairing it, or?
Well, of course, coming in January, when all the committee assignments were made, I was made chairman of the Economic and Workforce Development Committee, with one of the major focuses being our labor force participation rate, which usually ranks about 49th or 50th. A lot of times people don't realize you don't know what committee you're going to be assigned to until it's announced from the floor. So you're in the middle of the legislative session, drafting bills, et cetera. So at the end of the session, in just a few days ago, the lieutenant governor established what I would call, I guess, a select committee, which is to address the labor force participation rate, which has 13 members, the majority of those members being chairmen of other committees that I think are pertinent to, and I'm sure he made with selection as far as geographical, as far as the job industry. For instance, Senator Lydia Chasnall's on the committee. Well, she's the chair of tourism. Okay. So many jobs in the tourism area. Now there are also a Women, Children's, and Families Select Committee that was reauthorized. So some of the people that are serving on that committee, which is chaired by Chairman Nicole Boyd, it's a high likelihood she would have been on this committee if not for that committee as her chairmanship of universities and colleges. But Senator Derek Simmons is on the committee, Senator Mike Thompson, who's chairman of ports. You've got Senator David Parker out of DeSoto County, Bart Williams out of the Starkville area. There's, again, 13 people on the committee, and primarily Jason Barrett, who's the chair of labor out of Brookhaven. And we're trying to find some legislative solutions. But, of course, a lot of the people on this committee, the bills may very well go through their committee, ideas that come out of it. Senator Solly Norwood, Senator Norwood here in the Jackson area is a guy that I really have grown to enjoy a relationship with, and I think input from him on specific issues as it relates to the Jackson area, as it relates to the disparity in workforce participation rate across demographics. Sarita Simmons over in the Delta, Derek Simmons over in the Delta. So we've got, I think, a good mixture of people on the committee to try to figure out, number one, why are we at the bottom of this? Number two, what can we do to have more people in Mississippi working as we continue to try to grow industry across this state?
Are you confident that data is accurate?
I am not.
Okay, because I think it's totally inaccurate.
We had the problem that I have is that even if it's inaccurate, if it's consistently inaccurate across the country, we're still at the bottom of that list. I had state economist Corey Miller come the first hearing we had as a committee just during the regular session, and I told him, I said, before you leave, I want to make sure people understand what the labor force participation rate is, and it is 53.7%, and most people will say that means half the people that are eligible to work are working. That's not a good representation, because you take the state's population of people who are from 16 to infinity. There's no cap on the top. That are non-institutionalized, prison, nursing homes, etc.
I just want to stop you for a minute. Officially, that's what the Bureau of Labor Statistics says. We measure this based on the population in a state that are older than 16 with no age cap, but who are not institutionalized.
That's right. And are civilian. So they take the military out of it. And that is divided into the number of people who are working.
Right.
And the number of people who are unemployed. Now, that is a statistic we hear a lot. We are below 3%. That is good. The governor said this week we've got more people working in the state of Mississippi as a raw number than we've ever had. That is great. Economic development projects that are coming on board, that's wonderful. The problem is that 3% number only reflects the people who are actively seeking work who can't find it.
Unemployment.
That's correct.
That's the difference between labor force participation.
But there are so many people not seeking employment.
That's right.
Which distorts the unemployment number, but it also distorts the labor force participation number, because if you literally just started signing up for unemployment, it would help our labor force participation rate numbers.
Yep.
And the lieutenant governor and I talked about this, and I expressed, and I think he believes this certainly as well, the impact we want to make is to raise the GDP, to raise the standard of living of people that are working in the state of Mississippi, to motivate those who aren't working to work. But all of those things may not move the number. For instance, I think within the people who are working, we have a lot of people who are underemployed. If we upskill them, they could provide better for their families. They could have a better opportunity. There are outliers, for instance, single mothers who are raising children. Their workforce participation rate is about 20 points higher.
Yeah.
Because the buck stops with them. They feel they have to deliver. But a lot of those single mothers who are out there working, who maybe are pulling 2 jobs, if we have an opportunity to upskill them, they can provide. They're great employees. They're motivated. They're not the issue. The issue is they've got so many hurdles to overcome that they may be in a job that is not suited to their skill level that they could upgrade. So we want to focus on that as well.
Well, and I asked you that question, and I'm glad to hear you say that your confidence in that number is not terribly high. And here's why that I bring that up. The Bureau of Labor Statistics simply calls households and says, "Hey, are you working?" I don't know how the heck they get in touch with people, honestly, but I'll ask you this question. Have you ever been called?
In my lifetime, I've never been called. And
Do you
correct.
know anybody that's ever been called?
No one has approached me. I guess I should ask that. We have
do it on the Senate floor. Yeah. Ask your colleagues. I'm encouraging you to do this. Has anybody in this room ever been called? Do you have any constituents who have ever been called? I've asked that on this program. Nobody's ever said, yeah, they called me. I've asked it in numerous public settings. I've yet to find one person who said they got called. I have zero confidence in this.
And that is concerning to me. Now, we're going to try to use information. We're going to work with partners such as InSpark, Department of Employment Security. I think you can back your way into this number because you know what your population is in a county, for instance, because they can't give us any county information.
Right.
What really bugs me a lot of times when a Mississippi number gets thrown out that's negative, they can't tell us where the problems are. They can't tell us where the outliers are so that we can target that. They just say, throw more money at the statewide problem. That's not a good solution, whether it's education or whether it's workforce development.
Would it make sense, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I got to ask you this, would it make sense for the state to commission its own study?
I think that I want to look and see what we have done. I talked with our state auditor, Shad White, last week. I inquired, have they done some work in this area? I don't want to reinvent the wheel. There are some things that they have done and that he's glad to provide that will hopefully help us. We're going to look at the state of Alabama.
Okay.
They recently did some things, had a package of legislation in the last year or two. But there are a lot of component parts that we all understand have impact. Then there becomes a policy discussion. Is that a core function of government?
Right.
And I think that's a completely different conversation.
Sure.
But I want to be able to target it regionally. We're definitely going to be working with our friends at Accelerate. They are, our kind of workforces are now, and they have broken the state down into regions or ecosystems. And I want them to report back what they see as it relates to labor force participation when it comes to their particular ecosystem. So I think there are many reasons why, but there are tens of thousands of Mississippians, and some people want to avoid this subject, but there are tens of thousands of Mississippians post-COVID who are not in the workforce, that were in the workforce. Some of them may have aged out, retired, etc. But we have people who are not working because they have found a way to sustain life through whatever wealth transfers that there are, whatever system of life they're living, and we need them to aspire for better. We want them to be in the job market.
Yeah.
The other concern about labor force participation, before we get off that kind of formula, is the disabled are considered in your population. Well, of course, they're not going to be able to work
unless they're institutionalized.
Correct. But we have, the number 2 disability percentage in the country, and so there are questions around that. Department of Rehab Services, et cetera, others. are we looking at people who are temporarily disabled? Are we looking at what they can do work-wise? Does that require federal action to say, well, someone is designated disabled, but in truth they could work because Bureau of Labor Statistics considers work 15 hours a week.
That's right.
I don't consider that full time, but they would count for us at 15 hours even if it was unpaid.
Well, I'm going to ask you this question and let you address it on the other side of the break, but have you ever thought about bringing in people in the state who are not working, who in this statistic would be considered unemployed for labor participation rate calculation purposes, and saying, hey, how come you're not working?
I talk to them regularly as a public defender across this state, and I could give you some at least anecdotal answers.
Let's talk about that on the other side of the break. We got Senator Daniel Sparks in the Element Wealth studio. Senator Daniel Sparks, our guest. So I know the Lieutenant Governor, he talks about this all the time. He seems hyper-focused on this. And you and I had a great discussion during the break there. I just feel like we need to get more meaningful data, let's put it that way, before we start acting.
And that's what I think that was the impetus behind this, is we want to drill down because, again, we don't want to throw money at something and not even understand the numbers. But we also, with the announcement of the economic development projects, particularly in the last 18 months or so, you're looking at 4,000 jobs across the state, many that are going to be high-wage jobs, and we need to make sure we can fill those jobs. But, MDA's out there working every day trying to find other folks to come. That's why it's so important to me to get a handle on this number, because at some point you've tapped your labor pool based on this number. And we need to make sure that industry's not holding it against Mississippi that we have a low labor force participation.
And many of those new jobs, frankly, may be added to both the numerator and the denominator.
Oh, that's correct. That's correct.
So that would change it a little bit, but it doesn't get the people who currently aren't working off the sidelines and into the workforce.
And that's the challenge, and in the question of why, I think that there's a myriad of examples and explanations. And I try to go into this process without my preconceived notions, because you want to let the data drive you to a great degree and listen to testimony. But unfortunately, sometimes testimony is policy driven. They want to see a particular policy, therefore the testimony, and that's why you need to have these hearings and vet that out. But I deal with individuals on a regular basis as a public defender. And I've begun to drill down a little bit with them in candor of, when did you work last? What is your skill set? What do you do? I won't mention where I was, but I spoke with several people recently, and it was a slow day in the sense that they weren't ready for us. So I began to ask some questions. I had a young man, he was 21, and he had graduated high school, and he had a certificate in welding, and he had never been incarcerated, had a clean record. I said, where are you working? Well, I hadn't been. It's methamphetamine. The next guy that comes in, he's 35 years old. He looks 50. And what do? I'm a mechanic. When's the last time you worked? Well, I work for myself. Well, when you're working for yourself and you have a methamphetamine problem, you're probably working for cash. There's a lot of people who are, quote, not working, who are working because they're working. They're just not on the books of somebody with a W-2.
Right.
That's reality.
We have a lot of that.
And part of that used to be, can't pass a drug screen. I'm just not going to go. And, of course, marijuana, we've run across that for years. And I'll be honest, some of the industries that we talk to, if it wasn't for the insurance requirement to drug test, I don't know that they would be doing a lot of drug testing because, again, I think some people are trying to figure out a way to do what they want to do in life but still survive. But there's no aspiration to move into something that's better for yourself and your family and who you're providing for. A common pushback that we get, or a commentary that we get, is wages are too low. Well, I don't really buy that. Again, if it's my obligation to go out and provide for myself or my family, I'm going to look for the best job I can find. I'm going to go do it as well as I can and look for advancement and improvement. And I believe industry, and of course you've hired people and work people most of your career, you're going to find a place for a good employee. You're going to find an opportunity plus wages.
Absolutely.
Because of what happened, and the COVID pandemic hurt us, when the federal government, in their infinite wisdom, came out and gave $600 a week in pandemic unemployment benefits, we hurt ourselves. Everybody's waiting for the next government intervention. That's what we've created at the federal level and sometimes at the state level. And the truth is, we're not turning it back to say the freedom you have in this country, the liberty you have in this country, is to go out and earn as much as you want to earn. We're literally looking for what's the next thing the government's going to pay for. They're going to pay for my cell phone. They're going to pay for my internet. They're going to pay for my broadband. They're going to help me on rent abatement. They're going to help me on utilities. And you create an environment where work is not the worthy endeavor that it should be.
But has anybody ever? I struggle with this one, and I know what you're saying is aligns with reality. I just like to see a financial statement for a person who says, I don't really need to do that. I'm living off the government. What are they getting? I mean, there's TANF, there's SNAP. With or without Medicaid, they get free health care if that ever comes up. They just show up at the ER and get whatever they want. Where are they getting this money from? Housing assistance?
I think that some of it is government intervention. Some of it is people are creative. People do what, generally they want to do. And if not working is that, and they'll find a way to survive, whether it's, living at my grandma's basement, whatever it is. But the fact is we have a lot of people in that arena. Now, some of the professionals will say, well, it's a bad education system. Well, Mississippi continues to grow in education. And I think as we attack this labor force participation rate, there's two pieces of this. One is going to be backfilling from our K-12. That's where the legislation over the last couple of years, the career coach program, things like that. I've told the folks, Dr. Taylor over at Accelerate, I want to see data. We need to see data because we're investing a lot of money, but we want to see a better uptake percentage of our high school students who go into the workforce who are finding quality careers, not just the first job I run across.
Yeah.
That it's something that they desire to have. We want to make sure at our community colleges and at our IHLs that we are focused on careers that are beneficial, that pay. That is one thing that we have is from an education standpoint. I believe we're hitting the right pieces. The other piece is people who are past that high school graduation, people in their 20s, 30s, 40s. Child care, transportation are two of the most frequent ones that I hear. And we've got to figure out how to handle that. Some people think we should subsidize child care. I have a concern every time we start subsidizing a service as a government. But from an industry standpoint, if the state can make it advantageous for an industry to participate in that child care cost, if my child care was tied to my employer, that's just one more thing that I'm excited to work for this particular employer. So whether it is some tort reform issues, we need to look at liability. If a industry steps into that field, if we need to look at tax credits from that standpoint, that is one we hear a lot. As it relates to transportation, that's a hard one, for me to try to figure out. We're a very rural state. We don't have a bus system as you see in larger municipalities. But I think as we as a committee begin to drill down on some of the data that we see in a county by county level, some things may rise up. Like, for instance, in Northeast Mississippi, where I'm from, I'm very familiar. We just have a tough problem with methamphetamine. It is something that keeps you out of the job market. It keeps you bouncing in and out of the court system, and people, sadly enough, it has become a way of life. It has become sometimes generational. I also look at our disabled population. The fact that we have one of the highest disabled populations, I'll have some people come back and say, well, that's because of the medical services. There are issues in the disability system that we need to be looking at to make sure that people who are disabled are, in fact, disabled. That goes through an administrative law judge. You go file the first time. This is a federal program. This is SSI, so Social Security Administration. So it's not really a state issue. But again, why do we have that level of disability? And again, is there some way that they could supplement that without losing their benefits? Because a lot of times when you talk to them, I'd like to work, but I'd lose my benefits. That's the concern.
Yeah. Well, no, all good stuff, and many of those issues are problems that other states are facing as well. Yeah. I mean, it's not unique to Mississippi. I just wonder if because we have the least banked state, we have such a vibrant, expansive cash economy, how much that's factoring into our perennial listing as 50th in labor force participation rate.
I think that's a possibility as well, because we are the least banked, and I think Senator Horn a couple of years ago had a bill that was trying to address that, maybe trying to help people be introduced. Many of the problems that we have in this state somewhat are generational.
Yeah.
And when we look at an education system, and we have a new state superintendent, we're focused on CTE. We've got a new funding formula that's going to support the school systems. But at some point, if we have generationally failing school districts, there needs to be action, whether that action needs to be from the Department of Education. But you've got people who will, and I'll reference, there was, and I don't know if you had seen this yet, but there's an opinion that came out yesterday on our legislative districts.
I saw that.
And that is something, some of the things that were mentioned in there were concerning because they were very policy-driven, which was interesting. But from an education standpoint, we need to make sure that we're holding our education system accountable for the output. Well, absenteeism was mentioned. We're at 23%. You can't be absent at school and expect someone to then, when they're an employee, be present.
Yeah.
We've got to break that cycle.
But then there's a question of how deep can the legislature intervene itself into that situation as well.
It's tough. A lot of this is the family breakdown.
Yeah.
I mean, we're trying to treat symptoms, not treat problems.
Senator, always good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, man.
Yes,
Have
sir.
a happy 4th.
You as well.
We're coming right back, folks, in the Mel at My Wealth studio.